Hi everyone, my name is Sven Yan. I'm from Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in China. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you my research, which focuses on the record, China's first narrative true crime podcast produced by Caixin FM. My talk is titled Exploring Resonances in Audio Media, a critical discourse analysis of on the record, and it centers on how this podcast builds emotional and intellectual connection with its audience through the sound.
We've all seen how digital journalism is rapidly evolving, and in that process, podcasts have gained huge traction. They've more than a way to deliver news, they've become a medium for deep storytelling and meaningful audience engagement. What fascinates me about On the Record is how it uses sound to build resonance, not only emotional but also intellectual. And it does this in a tightly controlled media environment where journalism faces both institutional pressure and political limits. On the Record launched in March 2021 on Caixin FM. Inspired by global success like Serial in the US, it brings narrative style true crime storytelling to a Chinese context. The show covers rare criminal cases. What makes the On Record stand out is its approach. It takes familiar cases and represents them in new, emotionally engaging ways. It blends facts with first-hand interviews and immersive audio, offering a more human-centered way to revisit complex events. To study this podcast, I use Norman Fairclough's critical discourse analysis framework, CDA. CDA allows us to look beyond the surface of language and ask, how is this story being told? Who's telling it and why? What kind of meaning is being created and how does it reflect or resist border power structures? My analysis focuses on three levels. Number one is textual. The podcast language and storytelling techniques. Number two is the discursive practice, how the show is produced and structured. Number three is social practice, its broader cultural and political implications. Let's start with the language. On the Record uses a tone that is informal and approachable, but also serious. It doesn't sound like a news broadcast. Instead, it sounds like someone trying to understand a complicated situation, and he wanna bring you along in that process. Episodes often open with a big unresolved questions like, why has this case remained unsolved, and what are we missing? These questions are key. They don't just set the mood, they invite listeners to emotionally and intellectually invest in the story. This is a key part of how the show builds richness. The language is also descriptive and rhetorical, adding textual and depth to the narration. It doesn't just report events, it frames them in ways that encourage reflection and empathy. Now let's look at how the broadcast is made. Caixin FM works within a highly regulated media environment, but On the Record manages to maintain a sense of editorial independence. One way it does this is by choosing cases that are already public, but reframing them through narrative and emotion. The show the features interviews with family members, layers, and sometimes anonymous voices. These choices create multi-perspective storytelling, adding layers of meaning and credibility. Another important aspect is pacing. Unlike mainstream news, the podcast doesn't rush. Each case unfolds slowly across several episodes. This slower format gives listener time to absorb, reflect, and emotionally connect. It's a subtle but powerful critic of the fast reactive media cycle. Zooming out further, we can ask, what does this podcast do in society? On the record contributes to how people in China remember and interpret justice-related issues. It deals with tough topics like awful convictions, abuse in youth institutions, or failures in legal system. By putting real people and real emotions at the center of these stories, it opens up a space for public reflection. It encourages listeners to think critically about state institutions, legal norms, and moral responsibility. So this isn't just about storytelling, it's about shaping public memory and perhaps even creating a more participatory form of journalism. This brings us to the core idea of my talk, richness. Richness means that the story lingers, it echoes. It stays with you after you've listened. And the podcasts are uniquely good at creating that effect. Unlike TV or print, audio feels more personal. It's sometimes you experience alone, maybe with our headphones on during commutes, but it creates a sense of closeness between speaker and listener. On the record, leverage this intimacy very effectively through voice, tone, silence, and reason abuse trust. It creates space for emotional and intellectual depths that traditional news often lacks. To conclude, On the Record is more than a podcast. It's a form of digital archiving that captures not only facts, but the feelings, silence, and tensions around those facts. It challenges conventional journalism by slowing down, by centering human voice, and by asking deeper questions about justice and truth. The podcast turns listeners from passive consumers into active, reflective participants in public conversation. And that, I think, is a key contribution of audience journalism in a digital age. Looking forward, there are a lot more to explore. On the Record is just one example, but it raises many bigger questions. How are podcasts changing our relationship with news and memory? How do they shape trust in journalism? And does richness look like across cultures and media system? Future research could look more closely at audience response, how people process these stories emotionally, and what it means for public discourse. Cross-cultural comparisons could also help us to understand how podcasts work differently under different political and institutional systems. And as the podcast continue to grow, we will need to keep thinking about ethics. How do we balance emotional power with responsibility? How do we tell different stories with care, not exploitation? These are the questions I hope to keep exploring, and I like to hear your perspective as well. Thank you so much. That's all.
我们想知道凶手到底是谁。
他听到了我弟弟叫了一声皇帝，因为他的同学里面有一个黑社会的小名叫皇帝，后来老百姓都传他就是凶手之一。
他们和刘春金关系很好，就半夜敲门进了刘春金家，说我们杀了人，而且其中有个人说你赶紧给我找鞋刷子，我把裤子上的血呢赶紧去刷掉。
但更重要的是，在到达真相之前，我们想看清楚还有哪些未解的谜团和疑点。
死者高某的这个衣服的颜色与他失踪那天的颜色是不同的。
我说我那孩子输液呢，膀子直不动，为什么还说我孩子杀人呢？
那个烟头在哪呀？一定是要拍摄的。你不拍摄这个烟头，这说明这个烟头就不是从现场取的。
这个不可能是交警事故是吧？他的人的那个脖子上面一个那么大的洞，什么东西能够出那么个洞呢？是吧？
重现。
这附近是吗？遇害的时候。
也就是这个地方呢。
就是这个地方。
大概就这个地方，就是说那个上面一条马路。把摩托车推下来了。
追踪。
所以他是在上面。你好。我打扰你，我想打听个人。
调查。
这个情况不是他母亲讲的那个样。
曾经抓过这6个人，这个事儿发生过吗？没有。
倾听。
你还没有回答我的问题呢。假如真的是，比如说明天就能见到妹妹，亲眼见到，你最想跟她说什么话？
哎呀，你怎么那么傻？当时怎么会跟着她去做这些？
在过去6个月里，我们收录了将近2000分钟的采访录音，查阅了近万页的案件资料。经过精心编辑和制作，我们将为你讲述5个重大刑事案件背后的曲折故事。在这些故事中，你将发现小黑屋里的秘密。
可以走进去吗？
可以靠进去。
这边就是你说的那个湖。
对，他们那个小黑屋，三面就被那个湖给包围住了。
所以那边就是你曾经关过你的小黑屋。
对，就是那个方位。
你会认识被关押27年、不断喊冤的被告人和他们的家属。
你还记得孩子在第一次开庭的时候有说过什么吗？在庭上，
咱们孩子在法庭自己都陈述了，我们没作案，我有证人，就是那个检察院的说的，我当时教给你怎么说的，你这会儿你就反供了。
你将跟我们一起寻找第一个发现失踪女生尸体的重要证人。
看到啥了？看到的腿吗？
看了，真看不起。我一看他是趴着的。
你当时仔细看了吗？
还要你还仔细看。
害怕是吗？
我赶紧连门关上了。
你将遇见昔日逃犯劳荣枝的邻居，听他们回忆20年前这名通缉犯伪装出的另外一副面孔。
她长了一副皮肤很白，普通的女孩长得漂亮标致一点的脸型。夏天还是夏天嘛，喜欢穿或者要么是白色的套装，要么是白色的连衣裙。她给人印象就根本就不像是品格啊或者是素质不好的女孩子。
我们希望把事实、情绪、冲突点、疑团都摆在你的面前。在节目结束后，每一个人都可以构筑一座属于自己的正义天平。记录在案这档节目是财新 FM 诞生以来在长音频形式上最大胆的一次尝试。我们把它定义为一档真实案件型叙事播客，在这里你能听到故事，也能听见新闻调查。3月16号，也就是下周2开始，记录在案第1季将在财新 App 内正式上线。我们的节目会在每周2、周4和周53集连更。另外，欢迎大家关注财新视听的微信公众号，我们会在这里及时更新节目的最新消息，也会有跟案件相关的资料和照片等你来探索。3月16号起，拨开重重迷雾，记录在案，我们准时出发。